The HPCSA prosecutor who had just sentenced me sat across from me in a coffee shop, pulled the newspaper on the table towards him, and wrote two numbers, 60,000 rand. He told me that if I paid him, he would make it all go away. I was wearing a wire. This is the story of how I set a trap for a corrupt government prosecutor, and what happened when the system decided that he was the victim. And if you haven't seen part one, click on the screen now and go and watch that first. But here's what you need to know. The patient called Anthea Cohen developed a severe post-operative wound infection after repeatedly ignoring my explicit instructions not to wear her wig over fresh surgical wounds. A complaint was lodged with the HPCSA. My insurer appointed an attorney, and I'll call her Olivia, who was convinced by the HPCSA prosecutor, Gershon Mosiani, to enter a guilty plea on my behalf in exchange for a lenient outcome. There was no such thing as a plea bargain with the HPCSA. It does not exist in the Health Professions Act. Olivia didn't know that. Mosiani did. The sentence was brutal. 6 months of full-time rehabilitative training in an academic hospital. My private practice was closed, my income went to zero, and immediately after the sentence was read out, Mosiani walked over to us, relaxed, almost cheerful. He said, "Don't worry, there's no need to panic." At the time, I had no idea what those words meant. I was about to find out. I had closed my practice and I was at home, navigating the appeal process with a new attorney, Karina Bieler, a senior medical legal specialist at Bowman Gilfillan in Johannesburg. When I first told her about Mosiani, her reaction was immediate. He's a snake in the grass. She knew him by reputation. Then one morning, my bookkeeper Dale called me with something odd. A man had rung the practice asking about cosmetic surgery for his wife, and Dale explained that I was on a sabbatical and was unavailable. At which point the man dropped the pretense. He was actually Gershon Mosiani, the HPCSA prosecutor who handled my case, and he would like to speak with me personally. Dale quite sensibly told him she couldn't give out my number, but would pass the message on to me. The moment I heard this, I smelt a rat. Let me be precise about what this was. The hearing was concluded. The sentence had been handed down. For the prosecuting officer in a concluded HPCSA matter to make an unsolicited personal contact with the defendant is not standard protocol. It isn't even in the vicinity of standard protocol. And the timing was not coincidental. This call came the day after the deadline to file my appeal, both for the conviction and the sentence. I rang Skalkwitz, an attorney friend of mine, to get his read. His answer was unambiguous. Absolutely not. I called Karina. She was horrified. I also rang Olivia, out of habit more than confidence at this point, and she had said there's nothing to worry about and I should just go and meet him. Consistent as ever with her performance throughout, I decided to play along. But I wasn't going empty-handed. I found a security shop in Alberton and I drove there that afternoon. I bought a covert MP3 recording device built into a wristwatch. Small, discreet, exactly what I needed. I called Mosiani back. He was warm, relaxed and friendly, the way of someone who's accustomed to getting what they want. He suggested we meet at OR Tambo on the following Friday, as he was travelling to Cape Town for another matter. At a coffee shop at the airport at about 9:30, Annette would come with me. We arrived at 9:15, ordered some coffee and waited. 9:30 came and went with no sign of her. Just before 10, Mosiani walked in, beautifully cut suit, polished shoes, briefcase. He greeted us like old friends. Conversation began with pleasantries, and then gradually it began to make vague allusions to how things don't always go as anticipated and how someone needs to lubricate the system. Annette and I knew exactly what he meant. We wanted him to say it plainly. Eventually, Annette said, with a slightly impatient tone, "Mr. Mosiani, what exactly are you proposing?" There was a long pause. He leaned back. From the inside of his jacket, he pulled a beautiful pen. I had a copy of the Star newspaper on the table between us. Pulled the front page towards him and wrote the number 120,000 rand. He slid it across the table. That, he said, was what it would take to sort things out. That's a little bit beyond what we can afford now, Annette said tentatively. Luke's had to close his practice, and Mosiani nodded and, without hesitation, picked up the pen again and wrote two figures below the first, 60,000 rand and 60,000 installments, he said to Annette. Annette held his gaze. "If we do this, Luke will be able to start practicing again." "Yes," he said, "but how exactly will you do it?" "Don't worry, leave it all to me." He was completely at ease. This was not the behavior of a man taking a risk. He'd done this before. I couldn't help myself. Can we do an EFT into your bank account?" I asked. He stared at me for a moment and burst out laughing. No, he said, shaking his head. We stood to leave and we got to the list, and I noticed that he'd taken a newspaper with him with the figures written on it. A crucial piece of physical evidence had walked out the door. We still had the recording. That would have to be enough. In the lift on the way down, as the doors closed, Annette turned to me, and I'll quote her exactly. She said, "Not a fuck are we going to pay him." I called Karina from my cell, and she listened to everything, and her advice was immediate. Do not engage with him again directly. She arranged a meeting with an advocate named Kenny, and that afternoon, Annette and I drove to his chambers in Sandton. Kenny was direct about the risk. If this was somehow a sting operation directed at me, I could end up with a criminal record. But he was equally clear about what had to happen. He picked up the phone and called Glynis Breytenbach, the senior member in the DA. She was a senior figure at the National Prosecuting Authority at the time, and explained the situation. And she wanted to see us in Pretoria immediately. So we drove through in the afternoon, and her offices were in this enormous grey building, the kind of place that smells of bureaucracy, files and papers. And she said, he was direct, no nonsense Afrikaner who got things done. She cut straight to it. "I'm going to send you to a man named Captain Richard Hills. He'll arrange a police trap." And just like that, we were in the business of catching a corrupt HPCSA prosecutor. Setting up a police trap is not a quick process. It took 6 months. 6 months of Mosiani contacting me by phone and text and asking about the money. 6 months of stalling. 6 months of Captain Hills telling me to be patient. We couldn't proceed with the appeal in the meantime because we had to appear cooperative. We had to play the game. We had no income. We were hemorrhaging money. And every time Mosiani called, we had to sound calm. Eventually, Captain Hills called. The trap had been authorized. A few days before the operation, I went through to Pretoria with a shirt of mine, which was concealed with a video camera in one of the buttons here. And on the day itself, I would also carry a garage remote with a recording device inside. Belt and braces. The plan, the police would place 60,000 rand in cash in marked bills in the boot of my car. I was not to hand the money directly to Mosiani. We would meet, walk to the car, and he would take it from the boot himself. Captain Hills and his colleague would watch from a nearby coffee shop with direct line of sight to my vehicle. Once the handover occurred, I was to rub my left ear. On the 9th of April, I arrived at the coffee shop and sat down and ordered a cup of coffee. The Mug and Bean in Brooklyn. The moment Mosiani walked in, I activated the recording devices. He was relaxed, professional, as if this was a perfectly routine business meeting. We made small talk briefly, then he suggested we move out to the deck, a bit more privacy there. We relocated, and then in the middle of the conversation, something was said that I nearly let pass. The name of Dr. Leslie Berkowitz came up. The moment I said his name, Mosiani's response was immediate, casual, and completely unrehearsed. "Oh, Dr. Berkowitz, he hates you." And he said it in a way that you'd mention the weather. I want to dwell on this for a moment because it is considerably more significant than it might appear. Leslie Berkowitz was a prominent plastic surgeon. He was not a figure in the Anthea Cohen case as far as we know yet. And he had no involvement in my insurer's legal representation. He held no formal role in my HPCSA proceedings as far as we know. There was no procedural or professional reason, none whatsoever, for Gershon Mosiani, the HPCSA's own prosecuting officer, to have any knowledge of my personal relationship with Leslie Berkowitz. Let alone to know that Berkowitz hated me. Let alone to say it with that kind of easy familiarity, as if it was an established fact. As if it was something that he had been told or discussed in a context that had nothing to do with the official administration of justice. Think about what that implies. For Mosiani to make that remark, with that confidence, at that moment, sitting across from me at what was effectively a bribery operation, tells me that these two men were not strangers. It tells me that my name had come up between them. It tells me that someone with a documented personal grievance against me had found their way to the ear of the very prosecutor charged with impartially administering the complaint against me. I didn't pursue it at the moment. There was rather a lot else happening. But I've been sitting with that remark for years, and its implications have only grown clearer in the last couple of months or so. I will address the Berkowitz matter directly in a future video. For now, I want it on record. That comment was made at this meeting under these circumstances. Draw your own conclusions. Eventually, we walked to the car. I opened the boot. The 60,000 rand and marked bills was visible. Mosiani was suddenly nervous. "Why don't you just pick it up and give it to me?" And I said, "Geez, I'm very nervous, man. Just take the money and duck, man." And as he reached in, a large delivery truck rolled behind us, blocking the view of the line of sight between me and the police. By the time it had passed, Mosiani had the cash and it was already halfway across the car park, 20 meters away. And I was rubbing my ear furiously. The officers ran across the car park. They arrested him before he reached his car. 60,000 rand in marked bills, in trap money, in his possession. I drove back to the police headquarters. Captain Hills congratulated me that I'd done the right thing, and I had the naive belief in that moment that the evidence was overwhelming and that the outcome was no longer in doubt. Gershon Mosiani was arrested. The HPCSA announced it was investigating its entire legal department. The Business Day ran the story. It was national news. I had cooperated with the NPA. I had gathered the evidence. I'd worn the wire. I'd caught him. The criminal trial began quite a few months later and dragged on for years. I drove to the Commercial Crimes Court in Pretoria more times than I can count. I gave evidence. I was cross-examined at length by Mosiani's defense. guy by the name of Christo Maring, a skilled, tenacious advocate who questioned the recordings, sought postponement after postponement, and to be honest, he did his job well. Then the ruling came. The video footage of Mosiani accepting the marked bills, the most damning evidence in the case, was ruled inadmissible. Not because it was fabricated, not because it was contested on its merits, but because a junior employee within the NPA hierarchy had signed the authorization for the police trap. An employee who technically did not have the seniority required to do so. A technicality. That's all it took. Mosiani walked free. And the magistrate's judgment in the case where a government official had solicited 120,000 rand bribe on tape was scathing about me. The magistrate implied that I'd acted improperly by participating in the trap. He was also very critical of me not volunteering my previous HPCSA convictions during cross-examination, a matter of which I had no legal obligation to disclose whatsoever. The man who had demanded the bribe was positioned as the victim of an orchestrated scheme. I sat in that courtroom and could barely process what I was hearing. The story didn't end with the acquittal. Mosiani took the HPCSA to the CCMA for unfair dismissal. That failed. He escalated it to the Labour Court, who eventually referred it back to the CCMA, and I ended up having to testify again, Mosiani seated across at a table, Christo Maring at his side. During a break in one of those hearings, Maring pulled me aside and nodded towards Mosiani, and he asked me quite candidly, why didn't you just tell this guy to fuck off? I laughed. Knowing what I now know, I certainly would have, but that was the way the story turned out, I said. A few years later, at one of our many subsequent HPCSA disciplinary hearings, the incident apparently still was circulating in the corridors. During a tea break, the prosecutor at the hearing, a guy by the name of Tabang Baloy, made jokes about my setting the police trap. There were smirks, sort of inside jokes, innuendo. They knew the story and they found it quite amusing. And I was subsequently informed, and I cannot independently verify this, that Gershon Mosiani had been reinstated to the HPCSA as a prosecutor, or pro forma complainant they call him. Not a single consequence for anyone. I want you to think about what you've just heard across these two videos. A patient ignores medical advice. An infection occurs. An inexperienced attorney and advocate enters a plea of guilty on my behalf based on a fictional legal mechanism. A corrupt prosecutor manipulates that lawyer into a devastating sentence, and then the day after my appeal deadline makes unsolicited contact to offer to undo that sentence for 120,000 rand in cash. The police are contacted. The NPA authorizes a trap. Money changes hands. The bribe is captured on film. The prosecutor is arrested. The story runs nationally. And the man who solicited the bribe walks free on a technicality, while the magistrate suggests I was the one who acted improperly. And along the way, a passing remark from a corrupt official that a named colleague who had no business being anywhere near this matter openly hated me, said with the ease of a man who'd been told exactly that by someone who wanted him to know. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern. And I've documented every single step of it, with evidence, the recordings, with court transcript, with dates and names, and documents that cannot be disputed. That documentation is in the Unbutchered memoir series. Book 1 is available now free on Amazon, and the link is in the description. If you'd like to listen to the audiobook, you can click here. And if the story matters to you, subscribe. because this channel is just getting started, and what comes next makes this look like a minor preliminary. My name is Dr. Luke Gordon. I'm a plastic surgeon. I'm a qualified attorney, and I'm not finished. I'll see you in the next one.